There are many aging City of Tacoma facilities that are used every day to conduct city services. While some built over 100 years ago, many of these locations are no longer meeting the needs of the community. Because of this, the City Council recommended the creation of a Facility Advisory Committee, which had the responsibility of prioritizing which of these aging facilities should receive attention first. Jim Dugan from Parametrics helped to lead this effort and is here today to talk more about what was accomplished. Jim, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, Jim, let's start out by letting our viewers know what was the Facility Advisory Committee meant to do and how did it come together?
Good question. So you already spoke to a piece of it, government buildings that are aging, yes, and a concern by staff and the city around continued levels of service that come from those facilities. Mm-hmm. City staff's been working for a long time to try and figure out how to analyze, evaluate. So the Facility Advisory Committee was brought together to evaluate the current state of the city-owned facilities, more than 65 buildings, wow, roughly. We pulled together a group of people, the Facility Advisory Committee. Some were picked by council, some by staff. Then of those, we picked organically the rest, so we would have a well-represented City of Tacoma committee. Mm-hmm. Some connected to the built environment, some not. We ended up with about 19, and we had about 12 or 13 meetings before we came to our final report.
Wow. And can you let our viewers know, Jim, what was your role specifically with the FAC?
Yeah. On the heels of a lot of great work done by city staff for multiple years, mm-hmm, they asked me to help plan and facilitate the committee based on my experience of having done that before for multiple public agencies, could be school districts, could be cities, but a independent third party that has no dog in the hunt, as they say, to just marshal the resources of a group of people that may not have ever done this before. And it's a piece of work that I have done before. And most important, I was doing that at the same time for the Tacoma Public Schools and Metro Parks Tacoma, along with the city. So we were able to look at how to share resources where we could. And there's more to come on that in a future show. So
it sounds like you were wearing many hats and had many things to manage at the time and still to this day, right? Yes. So can you walk us through the FAC schedule and what did you do and talk about?
Good. So we had about 12 or 13 bi-weekly meetings between February and the middle of summer before we put together the final report. Mm-hmm. But the work that we did began with site tours. We took the teams through what do our fire stations look like, our libraries, our senior centers. Beyond that, on one meeting at a time, we had topics. Mm-hmm. Take the fire department, levels of service, standards of care, mm-hmm, finding out that we have fire stations in houses, not in fire stations, mm-hmm, finding out the condition of them, going to the Streets and Grounds facility that's a 1909 building, which is 115 years old, things like that. So we did that. As we came through all of that, it now became time for us to do what our job really was, which is something the city has struggled with, which is how do we score them? Mm-hmm. How do we prioritize the most needed to the least most needed? Right? Mm-hmm. So one of our members, our youth member actually, Ashley Brewster, came up with a way to do it that the committee agreed to. And we created 5 categories by which to evaluate facilities. They were, I'm going to read it so I don't get it wrong, public and user worker safety, mm-hmm, emergency services, equity, facility condition, community value, and city vision and goals. And we evaluated all the facilities through them with weighted factors to come up with a numerical means from most important to least most important.
Okay. Yeah. And so in touring the facilities over the several months, and can you speak a little more on the report that laid out the committee's findings?
It's a 27-page report, so I'm going to put it in just a couple of quick sentences. Okay. Probably paramount, without question and unanimously, was to ensure the safety of city employees and the safety of the public. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When we looked at every building, we looked through that filter first. And I believe Beyond that, we started to look at other operational inadequacies to try and determine, is it working? Does that service center actually work? Does that fire station that looks like it's in a 1936 house that has all the equipment on the curb, is that really what we should do? And Streets and Grounds, shocked the building hadn't fallen down. Now these buildings are old. Some might say, well, they haven't been maintained, and that's not the case. We're still using them because they have been maintained. It's just they're old.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the thrust of the outcome of that was to really look at what should be replaced, what should be fixed, and what should be left alone.
Right, right.
And that's how the report, and it ultimately prioritizes all the buildings so that when the city decides to go out to the public and ask for a vote, for a bond, we know what that list is and we know what the dollar values are, and we've already done the work.
Right. So you've spoken a little bit about recommendations. Are there any other pieces that you'd like to share with our viewers in regards to recommendations?
Oh, yeah. Additional recommendations, and it's probably one of the ones that came up at the very end, was to make sure that when a capital bond is voted for and approved to do the work that we evaluated, that an accountability mechanism would be put in place, either with the Planning Commission or with a new body, to monitor the work and make sure that the work that was planned is the work that was done. But in addition to that, things like the Tacoma Municipal Building, it's in terrible shape. But we don't know enough about it yet to know what to do with it, so it became a recommendation of it needs to be further evaluated on its own.
Okay.
And so we have a number of those. The Rialto Theater was one of those. But most important, when we were done with our linear numeric evaluation, we took a step back and realized that it's primarily fire stations, public safety.
Okay.
It didn't have, I think Streets and Grounds fell right at the top, street ops, that 1909 building, 5 or 6 fire stations, but it didn't have libraries, and we know that we need one in the Hilltop area. We know we need one in the Lower East Side. So we made some final adjustments and brought some things from the bottom of the list back up into the top, just because we know our community, we know what we need, and we've been listening to them for years. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then our final question, you did kind of touch on this. What projects are being prioritized? You mentioned the fire stations, and can you also speak just a little bit on other projects that are being prioritized right now?
Yeah, so we've got the Fleet and Logistics Center, as possible co-location with street operations. Street operations is at the very top. There's fire stations 15, 4, 11, 7, and 2 that are mostly the downtown area that are at the top of the list. Other recommendations was to leverage additional state funding for some of those projects that fell to the bottom of the list. Senior centers, there's an answer for senior centers that we haven't come up with yet. So an additional recommendation was to reevaluate those separately to see, should the city still own them? Should they be run and operated by a nonprofit or someone else? Okay. So we talked about what we think needs to be done. We know what can be done. We put things in place to reevaluate further, and likely the Facility Advisory Committee will come back together at some point in time. If the bond vote does something that doesn't get scheduled for a year or two, life changes, buildings change. We may need to make some other edits, but we're ready. When our city's ready, we're ready.
All right, I like to hear that. Well, Jim, we definitely appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you for everything that you and your department are doing, and we look forward to having an update on what's going on with the FAC.
I look forward to coming back.
All right, thanks, Jim.